Hello! Today I'm going to be presenting a series of videos talking about how you can use BigIP in an OpenShift cluster. The first method that I'm going to be talking about is how to use the BigIP to provide core services. This includes using the local traffic manager to provide load balancing for the Kubernetes API, machine config, as well as OpenShift router. The next method we're going to talk about is using container ingress services. Container ingress services can provide an auxiliary to the OpenShift router to provide OpenShift routes within an OpenShift environment. The third option that we're going to talk about is how we can use security to secure an OpenShift environment, whether it's providing web application firewall services or identity services for an OpenShift cluster. So now, let's go look at these three options. In this first demonstration, we are going to be installing an OpenShift cluster on bare metal. We'll actually be using KVM in this environment, but this will give you a sense of how we can use a BigIP to provide core services for an OpenShift cluster. You'll see the Bootstrap machine being built, followed by the OpenShift master, followed by the worker node. And then in the end, we're going to be able to log on to the OpenShift console at the conclusion of this demonstration. So let's go start that demonstration now. Here we are, we're starting with getting the pool secret that we're going to use to deploy our OpenShift cluster. This pool secret is used to download the software from Red Hat that will be used to deploy the OpenShift cluster. Here you can see that we're deploying only a single worker and a single master node, but there is also a Bootstrap node that will be used to create these additional nodes. The first part that we will need is to create an ignition config. The ignition config provides the core information to build the nodes within this OpenShift cluster. We're going to use a fast template to automate the configuration of deploying the BigIP resources that we need for OpenShift. The first set of services will be around DNS resources. In this case, we can see that we've created a DNS server object that will be used to host the DNS objects that will be used in this cluster. The next portion is that we are configuring the OpenShift DNS records. This will enable OpenShift to resolve the names of the different resources that were within the cluster, as well as creating a caching name server for our lab environment. Next, we can see here where we have the DNS resources that we created. We created several wildcard DNS records that will be used by the OpenShift router, as well as later on when we do a demonstration of using the container ingress services. Here you can see where we are deploying the local traffic manager configuration. These will be used to provide the core services for our OpenShift router, including the API server, the machine config, as well as the OpenShift router. Here you can see those resources have been deployed. They're showing a red state because we have not deployed our OpenShift environment yet. In this case, you can see that we are pointing to first the Bootstrap server, which is on 10.1.1.7, followed by 10.1.1.8. Next here, we are booting the first Bootstrap server, and it is downloading the ignition config to continue the rest of the configuration. The ignition config provides the way to templatize the base of the operating system that will be used within the OpenShift cluster. Here you can see that the services are coming up on the Bootstrap server. And we can monitor the status of the Bootstrap server by using the OpenShift install command. Take note that during the install process of any additional nodes, it is accessing the machine config service through the BigIP that is sitting in front of the OpenShift cluster. Once the Bootstrap process completes building the master node, we can then move to shut down that Bootstrap node because it is no longer needed. So here we can see that we are shutting down that bootstrap node because it's no longer needed. We are now waiting for the install process to complete. Once the master node comes up, there are additional services that come up. There are several cluster operators that are used as part of the core OpenShift infrastructure that are deployed within an OpenShift cluster. Once these services have completed deploying, our OpenShift cluster is now fully deployed and we can log into the administrative GUI. Here we are now logging into the administrative GUI using the default kubeadmin credential that is created during the install process, and we can see that the cluster is completely deployed. Hello! In today's video, we are going to be deploying the container ingress services within an OpenShift 4 cluster. We will be using the operator hub to install the container ingress services and deploying an OpenShift route that will use a big IP instead of the included OpenShift router to deploy that resource. Once we've deployed that OpenShift route, we will then apply a WAF policy or security policy to secure that route and demonstrate how the big IP can be used to protect OpenShift resources. In this first screen, we can see that we have logged into the OpenShift console. We are going to be adding the big IP to the OpenShift network. Here you can see that within the OpenShift cluster, there are two networks that are defined for each of the OpenShift nodes. In this example here, we're going to be adding an additional host, the big IP, that will appear as a third node within the OpenShift cluster. At this point, we have added the big IP to the OpenShift node, but there is no way yet for the big IP to receive the traffic that's coming from the OpenShift cluster. In this screen here, we're going through the process of enabling the VXLAN configuration so that the big IP can communicate with the OpenShift network over OVS. Here we are now in the operator hub where we are installing the container ingress services. Container ingress services is going to provide a method that we can use the big IP to host OpenShift routes instead of the built-in OpenShift router. This is very useful because the big IP will reside outside of the OpenShift infrastructure, allowing you to leverage your OpenShift resources for additional application capabilities. Here you can see that we have deployed the container ingress services. In a previous video, we demonstrated installing the container ingress services in an OpenShift environment to act as an OpenShift router. In this particular video, we are going to be demonstrating deploying an OpenShift route that will be using the big IP to host that route instead of the OpenShift router. Here we are creating the route. We are going to provide the necessary information to specify the host name and path of the route, as well as the backend service that will be using it. You'll notice that there is the default OpenShift router that is deploying in the resource, but we are also seeing that the big IP is also hosting this particular route. If we open up this route in a web browser, we can see that the route has been deployed and that the traffic is now passing through the big IP device. The big IP is attached to the OpenShift network, and you can see that the origins of the traffic is coming from the big IP that is part of that OpenShift network. In this particular example, you can see that there is no security policy that has been applied. We're next going to deploy a security policy to protect this OpenShift route. We're going to protect this OpenShift route by applying what we call an AS3 override. This is a config map that includes the configuration, that includes the specified security policy, as well as a logging profile to protect the resource. Here you can see that that security policy has been applied, as well as a logging profile for that OpenShift route. We can simulate an attack on this OpenShift route by sending a curl command that sends a simulated attack. In this case, we're sending a header that says xhacker and the command cat etc password. We're also sending some legitimate requests so that we can inspect these requests in the logs. Here you can see within the web application firewall request logs that we have successfully blocked our attack. We can also see the additional requests that we sent that were legitimate. This concludes our demonstration of deploying an OpenShift route on a big IP. Hello, in today's video we're going to be demonstrating how to use the big IP to provide federated OpenID authentication for an OpenShift management console. We're going to be making use of Big IP Access Policy Manager to provide a OpenID Connect resource for the OpenShift management console. Here you can see that we are adding an identity provider within the management console of OpenShift. It expects a couple of key pieces of information, including the client ID, client secret, information that we can find by logging onto the big IP and finding it from the GUI. In this case, you can see that we're also calling the OpenShift OAuth server after the authentication is complete, and that we are providing an OpenID Connect service that will be used by the management console when authenticating users. Now that we have the information that we need to configure OpenShift, we can enter that information into the OpenShift management console. Here you can see that we have the policy that we are using to protect OpenShift. In this case, we're not doing any authentication, but you can see that we are applying an authorization step where we are using the username that is provided as the identity that will be used within OpenShift. And here you can see that we are providing the configuration information to configure OpenID within the OpenShift environment. Once we have completed entering the necessary information, we can log out and log in as the OpenID user. You'll notice here that instead of seeing a prompt for username and password, we have an additional option for logging in with OpenID. Here you can see that we are completing the OpenID Connect process to allow us to connect, and we have the identity of the end user that logged in. This concludes our demonstration of using Big IP APM for authentication of your OpenShift management console. Thank you for watching.